The courtroom door slammed shut, silencing the whispers of the crowd. All eyes turned to the girl at the center, her braids pulled tight, her hands steady despite the chains of scrutiny around her. This wasn't just a trial, it was a battlefield, and she was about to rewrite the rules. 17-year-old Amara Jackson stood alone at the defendant's table, her worn sneakers scuffing the polished wood floor. The air in the courtroom was thick with tension, the kind that clung to your skin and made every breath feel like a gamble. She'd been here before, not in this exact room, but in moments where the world looked at her and saw only a problem, not a person. Today, though, was different. Today, the stakes were higher than anyone in the room could fathom, especially the man in the black robe glaring down at her. Judge Harold Grayson was a fixture in Willow County, known for his sharp tongue and sharper biases. His reputation preceded him, a man who believed justice was a game he could control, especially when the defendant didn't look like him. His pale blue eyes locked onto Amara, narrowing as if he could see through her. To him, she was just another case, another black kid from the wrong side of town, caught up in a petty theft charge that seemed open and shut. But Amara wasn't just anyone. Beneath her quiet demeanor burned a mind that could outmaneuver anyone in this room, a legal IQ honed by years of studying law books in secret, a passion sparked by watching her father's life unravel in a courtroom just like this one. It started 3 months ago, in a corner store on Maple Street. Amara had been there, picking up milk for her grandmother, when a clerk accused her of stealing a candy bar she hadn't touched. The store's security footage was grainy, inconclusive, but the clerk's word was enough for the police to haul her in. The accusation snowballed, fueled by whispers of troublemaker and typical, until it landed her here, in front of Grayson, who seemed all too eager to play his favorite game, truth or lie. It was his way of sizing up defendants, a psychological trap disguised as a test of character. He'd ask a series of questions, rapid fire, demanding instant answers to catch them in contradictions. Most crumbled under the pressure. Amara wouldn't. "Miss Jackson," Grayson began, his voice dripping with condescension, "let's play a little game. Truth or lie, you were at the store to steal, weren't you?" The crowd murmured, and Amara felt their eyes boring into her. She straightened, her voice clear and steady. "Lie," she said, meeting his gaze without flinching. Grayson smirked, leaning back in his chair. "Truth or lie, you've been in trouble before, haven't you? Kids like you always are." "Lie," Amara shot back, her tone unwavering. A ripple of surprise passed through the courtroom. Most defendants would have hesitated, stumbled over their words. Not her. The judge's smirk faltered, but he pressed on, his questions growing sharper, more personal. "Truth or lie, you think you're smarter than everyone in this room, don't you?" The crowd held its breath, sensing the trap. Grayson expected her to falter, to admit to arrogance or deny it weakly. Instead, Amara tilted her head, a spark of defiance in her eyes. "Truth," she said, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. Gasps echoed from the gallery. Grayson's face reddened, his gavel twitching in his hand. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone like her. The game continued, each question a jab, each answer a counterpunch. Amara's responses were precise, calculated, rooted in a knowledge of the law that Grayson hadn't anticipated. She'd spent nights poring over legal texts, memorizing statutes, dissecting case law, her only escape from a world that seemed determined to box her in. Her father's wrongful conviction years ago had been the spark, the injustice of it had fueled her, turned her into a weapon of intellect no one saw coming. But Grayson wasn't just playing a game. His questions began to stray from the case, veering into dangerous territory. "Truth or lie, people like you belong in places like this, don't they?" The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. The courtroom erupted in murmurs, some outraged, others nodding in agreement. Amara's public defender, a tired man named Mr. Ellis, shot to his feet, objecting, but Grayson waved him off. "Answer the question, Miss Jackson," the judge demanded, his voice cold. Amara's heart pounded, but her face remained a mask of calm. She knew this moment was bigger than her. It was about every kid who'd been judged before they could speak, every person who'd been reduced to a stereotype. She leaned forward, her voice steady but laced with fire. Lie. And if you think that's true, you're not fit to sit on that bench. The courtroom exploded. Spectators shouted, some cheering, others jeering. Grayson slammed his gavel, the wood cracking under the force, but the chaos only grew. Amara stood her ground, her eyes locked on the judge, who looked like he'd been slapped. For the first time, he seemed to realize he wasn't in control. The tension had been building for weeks, but no one expected it to erupt like this. Outside the courtroom, Willow County was a powder keg. The town was divided, half saw Amara as a troublemaker who'd finally been caught, the other half as a symbol of everything wrong with the system. Protests had started small, with a few signs outside the courthouse, but they'd grown louder, angrier, as word of Grayson's tactics spread. Social media buzzed with hashtags Justice for Amara, truthfully amplifying her story beyond the town's borders. Posts from local activists painted a vivid picture, a brilliant young girl targeted by a system that feared her potential. One post, shared thousands of times, read, "She's 17, smarter than the judge, and they're trying to break her." Amara Jackson. Inside the courtroom, the conflict was reaching its breaking point. Grayson, rattled but refusing to back down, leaned forward, his voice low and venomous. "You think you can lecture me, girl? I've been upholding justice longer than you've been alive." Amara didn't blink. "Justice? You're not upholding justice. You're playing a game with people's lives." Her words were a spark, igniting the room. The crowd roared, some calling for her to be silenced, others chanting her name. Mr. Ellis, sensing the moment, stood again, his voice trembling but firm. "Your Honor, this line of questioning is irrelevant and prejudiced. I move for a mistrial." Grayson's face twisted with fury, but before he could respond, a new voice cut through the chaos. It was Mrs. Carter, a retired lawyer who'd been watching from the gallery. She'd mentored Amara in secret, recognizing her brilliance when no one else did. "Your Honor," she said, rising, "this girl knows the law better than most attorneys in this room. You're not testing Harry exposing yourself." The room fell silent, the weight of her words sinking in. Grayson's authority was unraveling, thread by thread. He opened his mouth to retort, but Amara wasn't done. She stepped forward, her voice ringing with a clarity that silenced even the loudest skeptics. "The law says I'm innocent until proven guilty, but you decided I was guilty the moment I walked in. That's not justice. That's prejudice." The crowd erupted again, but this time, it was different. The energy had shifted. People who'd come to judge Amara were now looking at Grayson, questioning his fairness, his motives. The clerk's accusation, the shaky evidence, the entire case, it all felt flimsier by the second. Amara's words had turned the spotlight back on the judge, and he was crumbling under it. Grayson banged his gavel, shouting for order, but the damage was done. The courtroom was no longer his domain. Amara had taken it, not with anger, but with truth. The trial adjourned for the day, but the real battle was just beginning. Outside, the protests grew louder, fueled by the day's events. Posts flooded with videos of Amara's stand, her words quoted verbatim, "You're playing a game with people's lives." The world was watching now, and Grayson's throne was shaking. As Amara was led out, her head high, she caught Mrs. Carter's eye. The older woman gave her a nod, a silent promise, "We're not done yet." Amara knew the road ahead would be brutal. Grayson wouldn't go down easily, and the system he represented was even harder to break. But she also knew something else, she was ready. Her mind, her heart, her truth, they were weapons no one could take away. The next day, the courtroom was packed tighter than ever. Reporters lined the back, cameras flashing, as the story spread beyond Willow County. Grayson took his seat, his face a mask of forced calm, but his hands betrayed him, trembling as he shuffled papers. Amara, meanwhile, stood taller, her presence commanding the room. The game of truth or lie was over. Now, it was about justice, not Grayson's version, but the real thing. The prosecution called their first witness, the store clerk, a nervous man named Tom Reed. His story was the same: Amara had lingered near the candy aisle, looked suspicious, and left without paying. But under Amara's cross-examination allowed by a stunned Mr. Ellis, she dismantled his testimony with surgical precision. "Mr. Reed," she began, her voice calm but piercing, "you said I was suspicious. Can you define that? Was it my clothes? My skin? Or just the fact that I was there?" Reed stammered, his confidence crumbling. "Two just meant you looked like you were up to something." "Up to something," Amara repeated, letting the words hang. "Based on what evidence?" She cited the store's inventory records, which showed no missing items that day. She referenced the security footage, pointing out its blind spots. The crowd watched, riveted, as she turned the prosecution's case into a house of cards. Grayson tried to intervene, but Amara was relentless. She quoted legal precedents, citing cases like Miranda v. Arizona and Batson v. Kentucky to challenge the fairness of her arrest and trial. The room was spellbound. Even the jurors, who'd started the day with skeptical faces, leaned forward, hanging on her every word. She wasn't just defending herself, she was exposing the cracks in a system that had failed so many before her. By the time she finished, Reed was sweating, and the prosecution's case was in tatters. Grayson called a recess, his voice tight, but the damage was done. The crowd outside chanted Amara's name, their signs now reading, "Genius, not guilty." The ex posts multiplied, with legal scholars weighing in, praising her knowledge and courage. One viral post read, "This 17-year-old just schooled a judge. Amara Jackson is a force." But the fight wasn't over. Grayson, cornered and humiliated, doubled down. He called for new evidence, hinting at additional charges to keep Amara in the hot seat. It was a desperate move, one that only fueled the growing outrage. Mrs. Carter, now officially part of Amara's defense team, uncovered something damning: Grayson had a history of disproportionate sentencing for black defendants. She filed a motion to recuse him, backed by data from court records that painted a clear picture of bias. The courtroom became a pressure cooker. Protests outside swelled, with community leaders demanding Grayson's removal. Inside, Amara faced a new barrage of questions, each one laced with Grayson's desperation to regain control. But she was untouchable now, her answers sharper, her presence stronger. She wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for every kid who'd been dismissed, every voice silenced by a system that saw them as less. The climax came on the trial's final day. Grayson, under pressure from the recusal motion and public scrutiny, made a fatal mistake. He lashed out, accusing Amara of manipulating the system with her so-called intelligence. The room gasped. Even his allies in the gallery winced. Amara seized the moment, her voice rising with a quiet power that silenced everyone. "The system isn't mine to manipulate. It's yours. And you've been doing it for years." The gavel fell, but it was too late. The truth was out. Grayson's bias, his game, his crumbling authority, it was all laid bare. The jury deliberated for less than an hour before returning, "Not guilty." The courtroom erupted in cheers, tears streaming down Mrs. Carter's face as she hugged Amara. Outside, the crowd roared, their voices carrying through the walls. But the story didn't end there. Amara's victory sparked a reckoning. Grayson was removed from the bench, his career in ruins, as investigations into his conduct deepened. The town of Willow County began to change, slowly, painfully, as community leaders pushed for reforms. Amara, now a local hero, started a youth program, teaching kids like her how to navigate and challenge the system. Her story spread, inspiring countless others to speak their truth. In the end, it wasn't just about winning a trial. It was about showing the world what happens when a brilliant mind refuses to be silenced. Amara Jackson, the girl who'd been underestimated, had rewritten the rules and the world was better for it. As the courtroom doors swung open, Amara Jackson stepped into the sunlight, her silhouette framed against the chaos of the crowd outside. The cheers were deafening, a wave of voices chanting her name, but her mind was already racing ahead. She'd won the battle, but the war was far from over. The not guilty verdict was a triumph, a crack in the foundation of a system that had tried to crush her, but Amara knew the world didn't change in a single day. Judge Grayson's fall was just the beginning. The days following the trial were a whirlwind. Willow County, once a sleepy town where injustice thrived in the shadows, was now a battleground for change. The protests that had started as a handful of signs outside the courthouse had grown into a movement. Community organizers, inspired by Amara's courage, rallied for systemic reforms, better training for law enforcement, accountability for judges, and programs to empower youth who'd been written off. X posts exploded with her story, shared by activists, lawyers, and everyday people who saw in her a spark of hope. One post, with millions of views, showed a grainy video of her final words to Grayson: "The system isn't mine to manipulate. It's yours." The caption read, "This is what justice looks like." Amara Jackson. Amara, though, wasn't basking in the spotlight. She returned home to her grandmother's small apartment, where the air smelled of collard greens and old books. Her grandmother, Miss Ruth, wrapped her in a hug that felt like it could hold the world together. "You did it, baby," she whispered, her voice thick with pride. But Amara's eyes were distant. She was already thinking about the next fight, not just for herself, but for everyone else who'd been silenced. Mrs. Carter, the retired lawyer who'd become Amara's mentor, was waiting at the kitchen table with a stack of papers. "You're not done yet," she said, sliding a folder toward her. Inside were applications for law school scholarships, letters of recommendation, and a proposal for a community legal clinic. "You've got a gift, Amara. The world needs it." Amara hesitated, her fingers tracing the edges of the folder. She was only 17, but the weight of her potential felt heavier than the chains of the courtroom. The fallout from the trial was seismic. Judge Grayson's removal from the bench was swift, spurred by Mrs. Carter's motion and a flood of complaints unearthed by local journalists. Court records revealed a pattern: black defendants in Grayson's courtroom were sentenced to longer terms, faced harsher penalties, and were less likely to receive fair hearings. The numbers were stark, undeniable, and they fueled a public outcry that reached beyond Willow County. National news outlets picked up the story, with headlines like "Teen Genius Exposes Biased Judge" and "The Girl Who Broke the System." Amara's face was everywhere, a symbol of defiance and intellect. But not everyone celebrated. In the wealthier parts of town, where Grayson had allies, whispers of resentment grew louder. Some called Amara a troublemaker, accusing her of stirring division. A local radio host, known for his inflammatory rhetoric, claimed the trial was a witch hunt against a respected judge. X posts from his supporters echoed the sentiment, with hashtags like "Grayson was framed" gaining traction among those who saw Amara's victory as a threat to their status quo. The divide in Willow County deepened, exposing fault lines that had long been ignored. Amara felt the tension every time she stepped outside. Walking to the library, she noticed the stares, some proud, others hostile. A group of kids from her school, emboldened by the trial's outcome, started following her, asking for advice, sharing their own stories of unfair treatment. But others crossed the street to avoid her, their eyes filled with suspicion. She was a hero to some, a villain to others, and the weight of it all pressed on her shoulders. Mrs. Carter saw it too. One evening, as they pored over legal texts in the library, she set her pen down and looked at Amara. "This town's changing because of you, but change doesn't come easy. You're going to face pushback. Are you ready for that?" Amara nodded, though her stomach twisted. She'd studied the law, mastered its language, but nothing had prepared her for the personal cost of standing up. The pushback came faster than she expected. A week after the trial, the county prosecutor, a man named Daniel Holt, announced new charges against Amara this time, for obstructing justice, during her cross-examination of the store clerk. It was a flimsy accusation, a last-ditch effort to discredit her, but it sent shockwaves through the community. The protests flared up again, louder now, with marchers carrying signs that read, "Leave Amara alone," and "Justice, not revenge." Mrs. Carter filed a countersuit, arguing the charges were retaliatory, and the battle moved back to the courtroom. This time, the judge was a woman named Elena Martinez, known for her fairness but also her no-nonsense approach. The courtroom felt differentless, like a gladiator's arena, more like a place where truth might actually matter. Amara, now more confident, took the stand again, her voice steady as she dismantled Holt's case. She cited legal precedents, pointing out that her cross-examination was within her rights as a defendant. She even quoted Holt's own words from a previous case, where he'd argued for the importance of due process. The irony wasn't lost on the crowd, who murmured in approval. Martinez listened intently, her face unreadable. When Holt tried to paint Amara as a disruptive influence, she cut him off. "This court is about evidence, Mr. Holt, not narratives. Do you have any?" He didn't. The charges were dropped within days, another victory for Amara, but the toll was evident. She was exhausted, her eyes shadowed from sleepless nights. Yet she refused to back down. The community began to rally around her in new ways. A local church started a fundraiser for her education, raising enough to cover her first year of college. Kids from her neighborhood, inspired by her story, began showing up to Mrs. Carter's legal clinic, eager to learn. Amara started teaching them, breaking down complex legal concepts into stories they could understand. She saw herself in their wide eyes, their hunger for knowledge, and it gave her purpose. But the backlash persisted. Anonymous threats arrived at her grandmother's apartment, letters slipped under the door, hateful messages scrawled in jagged handwriting. One night, a brick shattered their living room window, a note tied to it reading, "Know your place." Miss Ruth wept, but Amara's resolve hardened. She reported the threats to the police, who were now under scrutiny themselves, and worked with Mrs. Carter to file restraining orders. The harassment only fueled her determination to keep fighting. 6 months after the trial, Amara stood before a crowd at Willow County's first-ever Youth Justice Summit, an event she'd helped organize. The auditorium was packed: students, parents, activists, even a few skeptical faces from the other side of town. She took the microphone, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. "I didn't ask to be here," she began. "I didn't ask to be accused, judged, or threatened. But I'm here because the truth matters. And the truth is, this system isn't broken, it was built this way. We have to rebuild it, together." The crowd erupted in applause, but Amara wasn't done. She shared her vision, a world where kids like her weren't judged by their skin but by their potential. She announced the launch of the Amara Jackson Legal Fund, a scholarship to help young people study law and fight injustice. Donations poured in, fueled by X posts that spread her speech across the globe. One post, shared by a prominent civil rights lawyer, read, "Amara Jackson is the future. Support her fight. Youth justice." Grayson, meanwhile, faded into obscurity. Stripped of his robe, he moved out of Willow County, his name synonymous with failure. The investigations into his conduct uncovered more than just biased rulings. There were whispers of corruption, favors traded with local elites. His downfall was a warning to others: no one was untouchable. Amara's life changed too. She enrolled in college, majoring in pre-law, with Mrs. Carter as her advisor. She spoke at conferences, her story inspiring reforms in courtrooms far beyond Willow County. But she never forgot where she came from. Every weekend, she returned to her grandmother's apartment, helping with chores, teaching kids at the clinic, and reminding herself why she'd fought in the first place. The town itself began to heal, though the scars remained. The divide between communities rich and poor, black and white didn't vanish overnight, but conversations started. People who'd once crossed the street to avoid Amara now stopped to shake her hand. The corner store where it all began put up a sign, Amara's Place, where truth won. The clerk, Tom Reed, apologized publicly, admitting his mistake. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. As Amara stood on her college campus a year later, watching students rush to class, she felt a quiet pride. She'd turned pain into power, fear into courage. The world had tried to break her, but she'd built something better instead. Her story wasn't just hers, Anna Marie. It belonged to everyone who'd ever been underestimated, everyone who'd ever dared to speak truth to power. What do you think? Where does justice begin, and how do we heal a divided community? Share your thoughts, because Amara's fight is ours too.